Hey guys, how you doing? It's been a bit of a crazy week here. We've had some issues around the house and stuff, but we'll go a little bit more into that as we go on. I hope you're all having a fantastic week as well. Today's episode, well, it's going to be a basic Q&A, just sort of answering some questions. A couple of days ago, I put out a post on a couple of places like Facebook and Twitter, and I've had some questions through. For those of you who want to ask questions now, if you look at the top of the chat, you'll have top chat, live chat. There's also a Q&A section there. If you just put your questions in there, no comments or statements or anything like that, just to make it easier on me for when I want to find your comments a bit later on. So the subject today now is sort of sowing seeds again. I know we covered this a little bit last week, but this is going more into your questions around it, and to make it easier for you guys so that you get what you need out of it. Last week we sort of spoke a lot. I know I answered questions, but I had sort of like a list of things I wanted to cover. Well, today I've got some questions that you guys have asked, and obviously as you carry on putting them in the chat, we will put them up. Now, for those questions that I've had via Facebook and some of the other platforms, I won't be able to pull those on the screen, but the ones that put it in the questions there, then you can. For those of anybody who does any support of any kind, whether it's a buy me a coffee or one of the super chats or anything like that, then they'll get their question read out first. It's only fair if people are supporting a channel that they sort of jump the queue a little bit. And I know it doesn't seem fair, but obviously they're paying for that sort of privilege. So basically, we are getting into the thick of things. It's February already, and for those of you already on the newsletter, you'll have been sent that newsletter with all the codes and all the updates and everything else. And in there, we started talking about, all of the seed sowing that we need to be doing and things like that now, because really it's going to kick off in earnest in it now. We are going to be really busy now over the next sort of 8 to 10 weeks. Things are starting to get going. I've got stuff down here going. I've got stuff up the plot going. And it's exciting times for us gardeners. The weather would play nice a bit better. And we've had some dry weather this week. It's raining today and yesterday. But I haven't been able to do anything with it. I've had 4 days off. And I don't know if you can hear this. I got a neighbour revving the guts out of his car, so you'll have to excuse that. But I had 4 days off. I've been back in work a couple of days now, and in those 4 days I was supposed to have been having solar put on the house. They turned up with the wrong size solar panels. They were only 395 watts each instead of 455 watts each, and they were like twice the size, so they could only get half the amount of panels on. So I've told them that that's just not acceptable. Then they turned up with these huge batteries that needed to go into the attic, and no way of getting them up there. So I've had to sort of jerry-rig a way of getting them up there because they just didn't have a clue. But anyway, hopefully they'll all be sorted out by the end of the weekend, and we'll be sorted there. So let's start going on, and we'll see what questions we have as we go. Like I said, guys, go to the top of the chat where it says top chat, live chat. There's also a Q&A section there, so put all your questions in that section. It just makes it easier for me to pull those out, and that'll be good. So I just hope that you've all had a really good week, and like I said, it's exciting times now, isn't it? So without any further ado, let's get on with the first question. And this comes from John Jenkins, and he's basically said, what soil should I start my seeds in? John, the easiest thing I can suggest for your soil is a seed has got everything it needs in it in order to germinate. It doesn't need any food. So you need a soil that isn't very rich, and it needs to be really free draining, because if it isn't, it's going to hold too much moisture, and that seed is then going to rot off or whatever before germinating. But you don't need to be something that's really rich or anything like that. Just like the ways that you can, you could use a normal homemade compost, or you could buy shop bought compost and sieve those out, or you could buy a dedicated seed mix. The other thing you could do would be to add some sharp sand or perlite or something like that. That will help that drainage, because people inherently overwater things, and especially seeds. Don't forget that seed isn't actually drawing up that moisture. You only need enough just to get it to soften that outer casing of the seed and for it to split in order to start growing. So something that's free draining, not too compact, and something that's a little bit lack of nutrients. They're not needed until after germination. Susan Chase, when would I start my seeds indoors? Susan, this would depend on whether or not you are prepared to have lighting and heat and things like that. So if you have an area, whether it's a cabinet or a shelf or a dedicated room, whatever it is, a grow tent in your house, you can start them pretty much whenever you want to. But you have to understand a few factors here. Firstly, how big are those plants going to get before you can plant them out, if they're frost tender, okay? So if we're looking at things like tomatoes, the last thing we want is 4 feet tomatoes before we're planting them out. So we need to think about this. Ideally, seeds are going to take, maybe 10, 15, 20 days to germinate. If they're chilies, they could take up to a month. So you need to take that into account. And then how quick are they going to grow? The last thing we want is to have, start off really early with tomato seeds, give them all the light and the heat that they require, and then keep potting them on. Well, all of a sudden, we're swallowing all of our space. So think about that. With tomatoes, if you're going to put them under lights and things like that, you're probably looking at March, end of March, because they will go really quickly. Chilies, I've literally just sown mine now, but for the hots, maybe you want to do them last month some point, but it's still not too late, So consider that. Look at when your last frost date is and when you're going to be putting them out. You want to be hardening off for 2 weeks before you put them out, so you can be pretty much 6 weeks before that. So you're looking at around 8 weeks before your last frost date, and then right, okay, 8 weeks. If I sow now, it's going to take 10 days, maybe go with like sort of 9 weeks from your last frost date for actually sowing, depending on the space you have. If you've got the space, then you could allow it to go a bit better, and it depends on the growth of the plants as well, how quick they grow. Yeah. Okay. Malcolm Smith, do I need a grow light? Malcolm, the short answer to that is, if you are starting seeds now, even outside, yes, you're going to need a grow light, because although they may be getting bright enough light to start with, then you basically don't have long enough light at the moment. I know our evenings are getting a little bit longer now. We're coming to the point where we're on the up as far as the length of the days go and everything else. But if you can produce, get light there, it's going to stop that leggy growth. And this is the danger you'll see with people that will put them in a south-facing window, but they don't turn them. It doesn't get it long enough, and then you get these really long leggy shoots that are stretching and aiming towards the light, and that's why you have to keep turning them to stop them like bending over and everything else. So if you can provide light, all the better. And when you're talking about light as well, keep it close to that plant, not enough so that it burns it, but close enough that it's not going to be struggling. So you end up with a short, stocky plant rather than it stretching out looking for that light. And it's only like yesterday I was seeing posts on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram of people saying, what's wrong with my plants? And, I've got them under lights. And then, they've got these little ceilings down on the deck and the lights are all the way up here. Well, even though you think and it looks like enough light, for that plant it isn't. Those lights need to be down here, really close to that ceiling, just not close enough where it can be burnt. Okay, so we'll pull some off here. So Dolly Perry, I'm notorious for overwatering. How do I manage moisture so it's not too dry or too wet? Dolly, you're better off to underwater than overwater. Seedlings, they don't need a lot. Consider the root system they have and the foliage they have to support. If they've only got a couple of leaves, they're taking up absolutely nothing. So if that soil just even looks slightly moist, it's wet enough. It doesn't need to be dripping through. You need the smallest amounts. The best thing you could probably do is create your own little watering thing with, like, a water bottle, like a drinks bottle or something like that. I would just put a single hole in the top of it and then just squirt that, because that will help you to control that water. It's giving our water time to settle down. But I mean, for seedlings, they're using absolutely nothing. What you don't want is large amounts of soil in the pot soaking wet. The plant isn't going to use it, and that's when you get damping off and rot and stuff like that setting in. So let's have a look who else we got. Timothy Johnson, do you use domes on your seed starting trays? Yeah, I will do. I don't do it all the time, but if I'm going to germinate and not in a propagator and it's just on the shelf in the polytunnel or something like that, I will put a dome over certain seeds. Not all seeds need it, but something that needs a little bit more humidity certainly will use it. Tomatoes will benefit from it, cucumbers, all of those sort of plants will benefit, chilies, but I mean, for most of these, I'm going to be using a propagator anyway. But if I was just doing it on a shelf in a greenhouse or a polytunnel or something like that, I'd certainly put a dome over it. Yep. Okay. What lights do you use, Tony? So I've got all sorts of different lights. I've got some. Let me just spin you around. Or sorry guys. So in them cabinets there, we've got some small LEDs. They're actually strip LED lights, and they are obviously sort of natural daylight. That one in the window there is an expensive light. I forget the name of it now, but it's really expensive. That's about a £300 light. So, but they are superb, and they have an LED board that you can just pull out. Down there, I've just got a couple of LEDs, strip lights on there. But when I'm I'm really got my tents and stuff set up and things like that, then I've got 3 or 4 of the Spider Farmer lights. I'm quite a fan of those. They're really well built. They've got a massive heatsink built within the unit, and they're really good. But you just need something that's going to provide that natural, infrared and ultraviolet light as well. That's what you'll see with the LEDs. Some of them got little red and blue lights as well, or purple, whatever you want to call them. But I am quite a fan of the Spider Farmer lights, but I just haven't got them set up yet because there's no need for them. Right, so look. So let's go back to some of the ones off Facebook. Dan Barwood, which grow lights do I need? So Dan, like we've just been speaking about, anything that's going to be close to natural daylight, 56k on the Kelvin range will be pretty good for most things that you can literally just get some seedlings going. It's no problem. Paul Thomas, how close do grow lights need to be to the seedlings? Well, we've already spoken about that, Paul. So again, you don't want them close enough that it's going to scorch those leaves, guys. All right, so let me just put this camera back. You don't want them close enough that it's going to scorch those leaves. So just literally, get them a couple of inches away and keep the light and the height moving. But what you want to make sure is that all of that light is being utilized by the plants, and there's ways around that. You can build a box around the plants and foil it, or put some mylar on it or something like that. That'll be a good way to reflect light, and it's an excellent way if you are using a window. Build a cardboard box around that window, sit the plants inside there, and have the mylar reflect it all back onto the plants, and that way you're making the most of that light that's coming through the window as well. And Sam Jones, how many hours of light do you need for seed starting? So it depends on what you're growing. There are some seedlings that you can get away with 5 or 6 hours of light. But for the majority of things, you need a minimum of 8, and even better if you can be getting 10. And this is why supplement lighting is so much better. Don't get me wrong, a plant will get by on 6 to 8 hours, but the intensity of the light during this time of year is just nothing like it, that the plants really, really need. So if you can supplement it, then you're laughing. The plant's going to get what they need. They're not going to be leggy, And this is the important thing: is about understanding what the plant needs at each stage of its life, and then you can tailor the lighting requirements. So just think about what this particular plant would need in when we would normally germinate in its natural environment. So like here we're going to be putting out tomatoes, but you don't see tomatoes germinating now. If you dropped a load of tomato seeds in a polytunnel bed or something like that, they ain't germinating now. They're waiting till April and May to germinate. Well, by that point the light levels are so much higher, they're so much longer. So what we need to think about is, right, okay, well, heat plays a part here, but so does the length of light. So once they germinate, can we give them the same amount of light we would be giving them in April or May time? Think about things like that. Okay, so that's that one. Let's go to this one. Timothy, do you use domes? Sorry, we've done that one already. Is that Steinar Friedland? Thank you very much for your super chat. Did you have any questions or anything you wanted to ask? But I really appreciate you supporting the channel. Thank you very much. We'll put that to great use. If you've got a question, slam it down in the chat and I'll make sure I answer it for you. Thank you. Okay. So Nuri B has been asking, hello, where have you been hiding? Long time no see. Nuri, there has been a short video every single day of January. So there was 28, 30 or 31 shorts in January that was there, and we've had a live stream every single week of this year so far. There will be normal videos resuming. Like I said, I just need to get this bloody solar panel stuff sorted out. I've got 2 night shifts left now, and then I am off for 12 days, which I'm looking forward to. I've got a load of videos planned, and I'm going to get myself ahead so that we can start going on there. David Toombs, thank you very much for your super chat. I really appreciate that. So your question a little bit off topic. Because of your grapevine advice 2 or so years ago, my Trollegan grapevines are doing very well. Much gratitude. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. Yeah, grapes are, they're fabulous. I mean, the trunks on mine are like this. They're huge. In fact, I'll show you one day in a walk around. But, and I've just literally finished trimming them back for this year. But, once you learn to prune them, they will produce kilo after kilo after kilo of grapes. It's amazing. Now, what I'm going to be doing this year, because I put an apricot and a peach in the same tunnel the grapes are in, but they've got so big now that I need to pull them out, so they'll be coming out this week at some point, and that will free up that tunnel for me to do a lot more things. But it'll also mean that there'll be more room for those grapes to get around. The trees won't be taking over the place. So that's good. But thank you very much, David, for your super chat. I really appreciate that. Okay. Space Chili, what is the earliest and latest times to sow shallot seeds? Um, you can sow shallot seeds, in December if you really want to. But I would probably say the end of February is probably going to be the latest that you know that you'd want to sow them. You could probably sow them at any time of the year and just continue growing them, and then use those. Even if you sowed them late and they only produced a small little onion off or shallot off them, then you could use that as a set for next year type of thing. So it really depends. But I would say sort of end of February would be the last time I would worry about sowing them. So it's not too late if you want to sow them now. Okay. Jenny Hewlett, thinking ahead and possible warmer weather months. Well, that'd be nice, wouldn't it? Growing potatoes in pots. What can I use to partially bury the pots to help retain moisture, etc.? Soil will not an option. Lots of wood chips. Yeah, use the wood chips, Jenny. Now, if you look back in, I think it was I grew 235 pound of potatoes in 200 square foot with no water video. Those pots were actually buried about a third depth in wood chips, and we cover that about what happens is those wood chips hold that water when it comes out of the bottom of the buckets, but the soil wicks that water back out to the wood chips when it's required. So wood chips are a really good way of doing that if they're above ground. I don't suggest burying those wood chips, but if you're not doing it with soil, then wood chips would be a good way to do it. Just make sure you go up about a third of the way up the pot, and have some sort of membrane. So whether you're on concrete or put on a not plastic, but maybe a membrane underneath them, just to hold those wood chips so they don't end up being pushed down into the soil and stuff like that. Okay, so Anthony Weber. So let's turn that one off. Anthony Weber, which seed starting tray should I buy and how many cells? Anthony, so it really depends what you're growing, because like if you were growing like some chilies, well you might want to sow them all in one tray, but you don't want to be having a 108 cell tray, because you may not want 108 chilies, so. And also smaller trees are easier to move around and things like that. Now, the long life cells from Oakland Gardens, and the links in the description below, guys. Those pots and trays and stuff now that Oakland's are selling, they are so strong. Like you said in one of my older videos, I parked a fire engine on top of those trays. That's how strong they are. And Oakland's have gone way over now to produce quality products. So those cell trays are fantastic. Now they do, I think it's something like 8 different sizes, and they start off with like a 6 cell tray, and they go to an 8, a 9, a 15, a 30. So it really depends on what you're sowing. If you're sowing something like cabbage, you might want a 30. If you're sowing or 2 15s, and just it really depends on what you're sowing and how many of those products you want. So you can really say that. Like for me, I could probably fill a 108 cell tray with the same thing because of the size of garden I have, but I don't. I still keep it down. Like I've got chilies, believe it or not, sown in 6 cell trays, and then I've just sown a load of them in, and then what I'll do when they come up, I'll put them into their own little cells, and then later into pots from there. It's about moving them on constantly. Now, what a lot of people try to do is skip that, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Um, So let's have a look. Nick Ryder, do I need a plastic dome over my seeds, and when can I remove it? You don't need a plastic dome, but if you do put one on there, just watch the condensation. If that's falling back onto your seedlings, that can help them rot off. Ideally, they are used for germination. Once they germinated, then I would probably move that dome. Don't have that water falling back over the leaves. Okay, it's really not required at that point. Plants prefer warm soil levels. The air temperature isn't as important. It's the soil temperature is the most important. That's why things do well when you give them some bottom heat. Nicola, I don't know what your last name is. Should I start all seeds indoors? No. Um, there's no need to do that. You just need to pick the appropriate time to sow if you're sowing outside. It's like at the moment, I've got broad beans seed all chitted and sat in bags by here. I could put them directly straight into the ground now. It's warm enough at the moment. It's not that cold, but we are due a freeze coming up. So do I want to put chitted seeds out? So it's easier just to put them straight into some pots. Keep them going till they, a good sized plant, and then put the plant out after hardening off. But things like broad beans, well, they'll take that cold, you know. But if you're going to do tomatoes, then you're going to need to do them indoors because they won't. Okay. Mark Grober, should you soak seeds before planting? Depends on what you're sowing. A lot of things do not need soaking. To be honest with you, I would say most seeds don't need soaking. Um, Things like peas, sweet peas, and chilies, and things like that, they all uh, are better as far as I'm concerned from soaking, but they don't need to be. Okay, I soak my chilies in tea. I soak my peas and my sweet peas and things like that in water overnight before I'm sowing the next day. And you don't need to do this, but what it does, it just helps that germination. It helps that outer coat to soften so that they can germinate much easier, and it speeds that process up as well. But consider that all you're doing with soaking is what happens in nature. A seed drops on the ground, it gets wet through the colder months. That outer seed coating breaks down, and that seed can germinate. And that's all you're doing. You're just speeding that up. Carolyn Way, should you water seeds right after planting? Um, this is a bit controversial, but I would say no. What I would do, and again, it really is dependent. Like lettuce seed, for argument's sake, they hate being really wet. Okay, what I would do is I'd moisten the compost before sowing, and then I would put the seed on that damp compost, and then either cover over with some dry compost, or I would cover over with some vermiculite, something like that. But if they're in contact with some wet or moist compost, that's usually enough. People way overwater seedlings, and you always see this with like a green film growing across the top of the soil, and that's when you know you're definitely overwatering. Where are we? James Hamilton, how many seeds should you plant in each hole? Again, this is dependent on what you're growing. If you're growing tomatoes, you can put 2 or 3 in it, but know that you're going to have to either transplant them, or you're going to have to sacrifice whatever else goes down to one. But when you're sowing things like peas, sweet peas, things like that, you could put 2 or 3 in each cell and allow them to grow. Same thing with beans, and you could sacrifice one as they come up. Onions, if you're sowing little clumps of spring onions, for argument's sake, well, they're going to grow as a clump. You can do the same thing with beetroots and turnips and what have you. They get 3, 4, 5 seeds in a cell, leave them grow as a clump, and they'll just push themselves apart as they grow. And multi-sown seeds is a good way of saving space when you are sowing. So, consider the plants that do well being a little bit more crowded. Now, if you're looking for really large plants, then don't do this. But if you're looking to eat them, and you just want modest size, roots or whatever it is, then multi-sowing them is a good way of doing it. Saves you loads of room, and you get hundreds and hundreds of plants sown very, very quickly. Okay. And Eric Pitts, how deep should you plant your seeds? Eric, when you're planting seeds, consider the depth of the seed, okay? So most seeds, a lot of seed can be surface sown and then just a very light sprinkling over the top of them. I see way too many people burying seeds under centimeters of compost, especially chilies and things like that. There is no need for that. You're just making it hard work. consider the depth of the seed and then go to around about twice the depth of that seed. So if it's just a fine seed like lettuce, they can pretty much be sprinkled on the surface and a very light layer go over the top of them, or even just a small layer of vermiculite or something like that. If it's peas, you want it twice the depth of that pea. Usually down to the first knuckle would be more than enough. I've seen people sometimes down to that knuckle or even further. There's no need for it. And so look at that size of that seed. Think about, okay, what's this got to push through? How big is this plant really going to be? For bean seeds, you could possibly go down to a really good, depth of your finger, but there's no need for it, So look at those bean seeds. Right. So let's get back to some over here. Jordan, should I start my pepper plants indoors sooner than I start my tomato plants in relation to my last frost date? Yes, Jordan, peppers take much, much longer. Firstly, a tomato plant would probably germinate in 7 to 10 days a seed. A pepper seed could take 20 to 30 days, dependent. So there's like 3 times the the germination rate. And not just that, they're notorious. Sometimes seeds will take even longer than that, especially the hots, and they're much slower to grow than tomatoes. So yeah, you definitely plant them. Like I know when I've grown the super hots, I've been planting them in the end of December, and my tomatoes have flown past them that they didn't plant until like the end of February. So just consider, your peppers and your tomatoes, they're 2 different plants entirely, and they're going to grow at completely different rates. And also, the peppers are going to need a lot more heat to germinate than the tomatoes would as well. So, Claudia, I live in, is that Northern Lower? Every Feb, I start seeds inside and they germinate, but can't sustain them, especially tomatoes, spindly, then die. What am I doing wrong? So if anything that's going spindly is looking for more light, what's happening is they're stretching out, trying to gain that light. You may have them on a windowsill that you think is providing enough light, and you may even have a light above them. But like we've already discussed, if that light isn't close enough, it's not getting enough light. Try surrounding them with some mylar or some tin foil on some cardboard or something like that to reflect the light back at the plants. But also the length of light is important, and 15 hours a day is not unheard of for a lot of plants. Like my lighting will come on 8 o'clock in the morning and it's still on at 8 o'clock at night. They get 12 hours here, and sometimes even longer. So think about that as well, the duration of time. So with those few things, you should be able to figure out exactly why they're going spindly, but it's probably a light issue. The other thing that can cause it as well is depending on the seedling, being too warm. So if you were putting brassicas in, indoors, then if they get too warm, they will stretch out as well, even if they've got enough light. So look at what the plant is as well. KP, I believe you have answered this before, but I have slept since then. You mentioned sharp sand once in a while. What is that? So sharp sand is like it's like a builder's sand, but horticultural sand, and it's basically a sand, but it's the actual size of it is quite big, and it's more of a gritty sand rather than like a play pit sand, or or builder's sand. It's much gritty, and that is designed for drainage that you could use with seedlings and things like that. And like the John Innes and things like that compost, they tend to put this horticultural sand and grits in them. But like I said, you can use that, or you can use something like perlite or something. Anything that's gonna not so much lighten the mixture, but allow the water to percolate through. That's what you're looking for. Right, guys, for those who haven't already, do me a favor, give this live a thumbs up. It really does help me out, with the algorithms and stuff, and people getting shared, you know. but if you wouldn't mind just slamming that thumbs up for me, I'd really appreciate it. So Janet Benson, how do I know when to use vermiculite versus perlite, or use both? Right, okay. Janet, there's a couple of things here, okay? Vermiculite will literally absorb water, and it holds loads more water than perlite will. Now, perlite will absorb water as well, but perlite tends to be used for drainage. It's that's why you'll see it in mixes and things like that. It lightens that mix, it creates air pockets, and it allows water to drain. Okay, so if you were to do that with vermiculite, vermiculite's going to hold that water. So if you had a very sandy soil, for argument's sake, vermiculite would help retain some moisture in it. Vermiculite's also a good product to use on top of seedlings like lettuce, because it actually allows light through, and lettuce are notorious for wanting light to germinate. So so that's really good, and also it will hold that moisture level across the top of seeds. So think about it this way: vermiculite holds more water than perlite does. Perlite's good for drainage, where vermiculite isn't really. It can help bog things down a little bit. There'll be lots of opinions on this from loads of gardeners, even in the chat here. I'm sure like loads of people will, will be talking about this, but those are the basic rules behind it, okay? Sebastian Smith, my onion seeds froze in my greenhouse. Will they still germinate? Yes, they will. So the seeds that I got down there, they'd been in my greenhouse for 3.5 weeks, hadn't germinated, and they froze when we had all that really cold weather a couple of weeks back. I brought them in here, and within a day they germinated. So even though they froze, and they froze for a long period, I think it was about 5 days, and literally the soil was like a brick, and came out of it, and pretty much every seed is germinated in the trays. So they will germinate. You just need to give them some heat, Sebastian. Right, next one's on here. Carolyn Ware, should you water seeds right after planting? We've covered that one. Jenna Atkinson, how often should I water my seeds? Jenna, if your soil even looks moist, do not water. You're better to underwater than overwater. And then later on, as the plants are getting a little bit bigger, well, if you've got a little bit of space, put your finger down in that soil. If it feels any moisture at all, just don't water, okay? But if the compost is falling apart, it's dry and everything else, then you may want to just give it a little fine watering then. But remember, guys, okay, water when it comes to seedlings and seeds, okay, is your enemy really, because that's what causes all the fungal infections, the damping off and everything else, and this is where people lose lots of seedlings. Charles Warner, what is the best way to water seeds and seedlings? Again, little, very, very small amount, not often, but just keep an eye on them if they need it. Use a watering bottle that that's got a single hole in it when you're just doing something that's fine. But as they start growing, you can give more and more water then. Crystal Burgess, how long does it take seeds to germinate and pop through the soil? So seeds, again, all different times, but typically for most, excuse me. Sorry about that, guys. That is work calling me. Let me just hang up so that doesn't happen again. So where was I? Oh yeah. So seedlings, depending on what varieties, like I said, we've already spoken about chilies, which are probably one of the longest ones. But most will take around 7 to 10 days to germinate, and some will even germinate as quick as 3 or 4 days. It really depends. And it's going to be dependent on the heat they're given and the light conditions, so consider that. Like, what a lot of people do is they'll go to their greenhouse and they'll go, right, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to give these bottom heat. And then they go and sow these seeds into freezing cold compost. So those seeds have just gone like that. And it takes some time then to relax again when you heat the compost. So you're better off having room temperature compost and sow them into that. Give them some gentle bottom heat, and away they'll go. All right. So, but again, it really depends, and there are ways of speeding that up. Chitting seeds, well, you can do that on paper towel or in a bag, like I've done with my broad beans, and they will, they'll kick off in a couple of days, and you can just pot them on then. Right. What causes mold on seedling soil? What can I do about it? So any sort of mold, mildews, things like that is with seedlings is down to too much moisture. So you want to leave the top layer of compost dry before you're rewatering. And once the seedlings have germinated, you want to leave it even longer because you want the bottom layers to dry out a little bit as well. Not go too dry, but so that they are just a little bit on the dry side of moist, and do that. The reason you're getting mold is because you're saturating the top layers of compost constantly, and then that's when damping off happens. Stephen Durate, how do I keep gnats off my seedlings? Stephen, again, this is a watering issue. Too much, okay? Compost is wet constantly, and it's perfect for fungus gnats to be laying eggs and things like that, and the larva to continue, and you'll end up with an infestation. So reduce the watering. If you're finding you've got fungus gnats, then you're overwatering. So knock that water back. But we've already spoken about covering that. Let's do a few more down here. Amanda R. What seeds are not sowing indoors this year? Are you not sowing indoors? So I'm quite fortunate in that I have 2 polytunnels, and I pretty much use them as engines for my seed sowing. So I will sow my carrots outside direct, my parsnips outside direct, those sort of things. I will eventually start putting beetroot, like when I do successional sowing. When I successional sow anything and it's warm enough, they'll be sown outside direct. But to start the season, everything is in one of the polytunnels, and I'll bring them on, and then they'll be moved out. So it's not until sort of like the summer stuff, and then I'll even go as far as sowing lines of lettuce in a bed or something like that, and use that as a seed bed then once the soil is warm enough. But until that point, everything is sown indoors. Jerry, I built your 4x8 raised beds last fall, but 3 out of the 4 bowed out badly. What did I do wrong? Didn't put supports in it, and funny enough, I did the exact same thing with my wooden and steel ones, and it bowed. And what this is down to the soil or the water that's in the sand or soil or whatever you've got in your bed, and it's pushing outwards because it's getting heavier. And incidentally, I was watching a video on Mark from Self-Sufficient Me where he was showing where it concaved in from the weight of the soil, because what had happened was the supports that in the metal beds, the wire supports, had actually the weight of the soil had buckled those supports, pulling the bed in. So I'm going to be putting some timber supports in the steel, in the wooden steel beds that I built, and I'm going to be covering that in a video, so stay tuned with that. But in the steel birdies beds, there is a fix for that with a little piece of 2x3, and you drill a hole in each of those and put those supports through so that they support those bars and the weight of the compost can't push down on them. But again, I'll cover that in a video as well. But inherently, when you think about the amount of weight that's in all of that soil in those beds, especially if they're big beds, then you will eventually get some buckling unless you put some form of support in. Now, steel rod is a great way of doing it, but you need to support them as well, because like I said, it's something I noticed on Mark's video, and he made a video about it, and it will be something I will cover when I go through my birdies videos as well. Okay. J from Melissa Kingery. I don't think I know where to ask a question. What seeds, even if it's cold, that you can direct sow. So if it's really cold, you're going to be able to sow things like broad beans or fava beans, peas. They'll do well. The only thing you're going to have to be careful of with these sorts of seeds is that you find a way to protect them from the mice, because they are going to become a really good snack, especially if it's cold. Okay, sort of any of those sort of like field beans, peas, seeds, fava beans. You can put out sweet pea seed at this time of year. You can sow beetroot outside, but until you might need a couple of days where it warms up past the thing, and they will germinate. But again, you've got to be careful with the frost, so you might have to fleece. But it's mainly those cold tolerant things. Brassicas will eventually go, but again, you'll need a few days of it being warm in order to to do that. Excuse me, having a little drink, guys. Right, so let's go back to some of these. Right, so I got 3 or 4 more from Facebook. Lorraine Williams, when do I start hardening off? Let's turn this one off. When do I start hardening off my seedlings for transplant? So once the risk of frost is gone, so say for argument's sake, the risk of frost is going to be the 1st of May in your area. Okay, so you want to be starting about 2 weeks before that. And the reason for that is it's going to take you 10 to 14 days to harden the plants off properly. And what you're doing is, on your first day, you're just going to be bringing them out of any heated area or any warmer area into maybe like a cold frame or something like that. And you're going to prop the door open of the cold frame for a couple of hours each day and then close it. And then after a couple of days of doing that, you open it for a little bit longer till eventually that door's open quite a lot and it's closed during the night. Then what you'll start doing then is you'll bring it outside during the day for a couple of hours, bring it back in, and then a little bit longer until it's eventually out all day, and then back in the night. And then after a while, you'll start leaving it out then for the nights as well, and then you can transplant it. And that's what you're doing. What you're doing is acclimatizing it to that colder environment that's outside of the greenhouse or the tunnel or wherever case. Right. Catherine Klein, when do I transplant my seedlings to the outdoor garden? We've just covered that. Matthew Oliver, what do I do to protect my plants if there's a late frost? Matthew, there's lots of things you can do. Firstly, you can be using fleece, horticultural fleece. Now, a lot of people, they get sold this really cheap fleece. It's about like 13 GSM, and it's paper thin. That's going to do nothing for you, especially if it's a hard frost. Get a good quality like 35 GSM fleece, something like that. That's good and thick. It's going to last you a lot longer. It doesn't break down with ultraviolet, and also it's going to protect against those winds, and that's the main thing here. And then there are other options. If we're looking at things like strawberries, you can mulch them with straw and things like that. If potatoes that poke their head through when a frost is due, we'll cover them over with soil. They will push back through, but that soil is a really good insulator. So there's lots you can do in order to do that. Now, if they're in pots, the best thing you do is pull them back inside for that night. You're guaranteed that way. There are other things you can do. Now, one thing that a lot of people stress about is when there's a late frost on things like peach and apricot and nectarine trees and things, because these are notorious for flowering really early, especially when there's frosts about. And a way of protecting them is to spray those trees down with water the night before, and that water will freeze, but it protects the tree from the frost. So you'll look like you'll have icicles all hanging all over your trees and everything, but it's a fantastic way of protecting them against the frost. Right, okay, let's get back onto some of these. J, for Mark Carline, if I'm growing tomatoes outside on an allotment, when would be the best time to sow the seeds? So you want to be sowing seeds probably around 6 weeks before you're looking to put them out, and that way you're going to give them the best chance for transplanting. Um, you know, so if you can keep them inside and keep them going, but if you're going to grow them outside, and all you're going to, you're just going to plant them straight out, no polytunnel or anything like that. um, Grow them for 6 weeks, sow them 6 weeks before in the house, keep them on a windowsill under a light or whatever the case being, and then once you know that last frost is gone, you'll be able to put them out, and they should be a good little size to withstand. But again, make sure you go through the hardening off process. That's the biggest issue with a lot of people, is they don't do that hardening off process properly, and they go, oh, it's fine, it's been warm for a couple of nights, that'll do, we'll put them out now. And then they get out, they check a plant, and then we get a bit of cold weather, the plant gets stressed, and then the black fly hit it, and before they know it, they've just lost a whole crop of beans or whatever the case is. Jordan, when you refer to a chili, are you referring to pepper plants? Yeah, they're pretty much all the same. Okay, so whether that's a pepper, a chili, you know, just even all sort of capsicums, things like that. All mild chilies, those sort of things. It doesn't matter. Anything that's that form of plant is what I'm referring to as a chili. But yeah, pepper plants are the same thing. Hey Danny, Tony, should I sow little and often to stagger my harvest? Um, yeah, it depends on the plant. You're not going to do that with things like your potatoes and things like that, where you just want one big harvest. But certainly with things like peas, Danny, lettuce, your sort of beetroots, anything that's not long growing, where successional sowing is going to be really good for you, especially with things like lettuce. You're pulling the outer leaves if you harvest them like that, but if you're harvesting heads, you want plenty coming on in order to replace them, because there's nothing worse than having lots of bare soil in the garden after harvesting something and having nothing to go back in there. So yeah, you want constant supplies of lettuce, all the salad stuff, the spring onions, the radish, all of these sort of things you're going to be sowing on a real regular basis. You could be sowing different varieties of like brassicas on a regular basis. So you might have spring cabbage and then a summer cabbage and then autumn winter cabbage, so there's 3 sowings there just for cabbage, but yeah, just look at what the plant is, when you think the growing season can be pushed to, and how much of it you want. Amanda Jane Jones, how do I avoid aphids on my seedlings indoors this year? Thank you. So aphids, again, this is something that it's very difficult. Once you get them, the important thing with aphids is taking control, right? You need to look at your plants, and if you're indoors, okay, you can't be just going there watering and coming away. You need to be checking them, and as soon as you see them, you need to deal with them, because if it's much easier to deal with just a few aphids, and you might see them on like just 3 or 4 leaves of a plant. Well, you can cut those leaves, take them away and destroy them, and that's the end of your problem. But if you leave just a few of them, within a few days there's thousands, and then that's when you have a major issue. Now, there are lots of things you can do. A lot of people don't like doing them in their houses, but there are soap sprays you can use. There are garlic sprays. It's not a great one for the house unless you really like garlic. But there's those sort of things that you can do in the house as well. But you need to be vigilant, and again, consider keeping the light levels right. Don't feed too much so the plant grows smaller, slower, because what happens then is you haven't got as much new lush growth, and that doesn't attract the aphids, because they need the lush growth for the sap that they're pulling out of that plant. And so if your plant is stocky, then it's building that lignin and everything else that it requires, and that will help fend off these things anyway. But look, it's important to be inspecting your plants on a regular basis and looking out for these signs of things and taking action before it needs it, whether that'll be a soap spray, just rubbing them off with your fingers, removing the leaf and destroying it, whatever that case being. Mark, if I'm growing beef tomatoes outside on an allotment, when would be the best time to sow seeds? Also have a massive amount of used coffee grounds thanks to work. Any tips on how I can use it? So coffee grounds are okay to spread as a mulch around the garden. Don't put it too thick. You would be better off using it as an ingredient in your compost. It's also very good for mushroom growing if you want to do mushrooms. So you could use coffee grounds as the substrate for mushroom bags, things like that. So there's lots of uses. Personally, I would put it as an ingredient in my compost to make my compost better. Again, planting, if you're growing beef tomatoes outside, the sowing them would be 6 weeks before, as we've already discussed with any other tomato. What do you think about germinating seeds on wet paper towels in a bag, especially peppers? Well, I haven't done peppers. Give me 1 second. But here I have broad beans, all germinating, they're all cracked, all ready to go and plant now. And they are in bags. I've actually got some ginger that I put from the shops in a bag on paper towel, and they're all shooted as well, and they started rooting as well, and they've been in there 2 days, so they will be going into pots very shortly as well. It's a good way of doing it. I don't do my chilies. I soak my chilies, and I know a lot of people chit chili seeds before planting them. I don't tend to do that. So, but I tend to soak them first, and then I'll plant them straight away. Only because I find that it's very easy. The root system of a chili is very, very fine, and it's easy to damage that root system when you're planting them on. So, but I do it with my all my zucchini, courgettes, those sort of things. From Melissa, Tony, is there any seeds I can direct sow when it's cold out? Yeah, we've already covered that. All the peas, the fava beans, broad beans, whatever you want to call them, those sort of things. There are, lots of little bits and bobs like beetroot and turnip and stuff like that. Some of the brassica seeds will go. Spinach will go early. Chard will go early. So there's lots of things, but consider that it's the soil temperature is the important point, not how cold out it is. Okay. So from Day, bell peppers and long peppers are upseeding seedlings, second set of leaves, but tiny, bit leggy. Can I bury them deeper when potting on? Yes. So although like tomatoes, you can pot chilies deeper, they don't have the root system or the hairs like a tomato stem will. They will root out, but they are much slower to do it than like tomatoes would be. But you can plant them deeper. So what I would do is plant them up to the old cotyledon leaves and then leave it at that point. But the first thing you need to do is address the lighting issue, because they've got leggy because of the light. Okay, they need more light. Anna, herb seed packets, etc., hyssop, lemon balm often tell you to stratify the seeds in the freezer for a few days. I've never managed it. I think the seeds just rot. Is it really necessary? Stratification isn't necessary, but it does help. If you're having problems with the freezer can be, you really need high quality seeds to to survive the freezer temperatures. So the better bet would for you to stratify would be to put them in the crisper drawer of your fridge and leave them in there for a couple of weeks and then pull them out, and they'll be fine at that point. And it'll also help with that. So if you do want to stratify, but to be honest with you, the likelihood is that they would germinate without it. And if you're killing them in the freezer, just stay away from that and use the crisper drawer instead. Right, guys, I think this one here is the last question that I have. Pat Joyce, hi Tony. I planted onion and shallot sets outside before the winter clobbered. They are indeed looking clobbered, although they sent up shoots. Should I start again or persevere? Right. So this can happen with plants. Okay, so they've been checked now, Pat. They've pushed up, and they've been absolutely mullered by that cold. And as long as you can see that they're pushing a new leaf out, leave them, persevere with them and leave them go. Although they've been checked, they still have a head start on what you would sow now because they have a root system, right? So if you can persevere with them, just leave them. What I would probably do is still sow some more as backups just in case, and that way you've got the best of both worlds. So that's it for the questions, guys, unless anybody's got any last questions they want to ask. It's been a relatively quick one. We've just over the hour, which is not a bad way to finish it, actually. So look, we're all going to be sowing seeds over the next few weeks. It's going to get really busy. Like I said, we need to be looking at ways to make our lives easier and to be able to make that process easier. And this was why I got onto Oaklands and asked them to get quality seed trays, because with a quality seed tray you can tap them down, you can push the compost into them, force that in, you can get plants out really quickly, and that tray just stays solid. It's not none of these little crispy things that's breaking a plastic everywhere, your plants falling apart, compost falling out of them. They are really good quality seed trays and pots and everything else. So for those of you who are looking to buy those sort of things, get across to Oaklands now and have a look. The link is below, right? They are fantastic trays. I can't shout about them enough. Like I said, I parked a fire engine on top of them, guys. We're talking like 27 ton, and that was literally sat on top of them, and you wouldn't tell from the tray at all. Like, the tray is up in the tunnel now with seedlings in it. So and I've got lots of them, and they do all different sizes. They even do deep cell ones. They're fantastic. They really are good. And I think as well, in this day and age, we need to be looking at quality trays and things, that something that's going to last us. Now, I've been using the buckets for growing potatoes now for the last 12 years, and I'm still using the first buckets I ever had. So when you think about that, I've more than had my money's worth out of them. Well, if you can do that with seed trays as well, how fantastic would that be? No more of this flimsy plastic stuff. And Oakland's have, I've said to them, like, you really need to switch over to all quality products. I mean, they've even just launched a polytunnel range as well, which are fantastic. And the company that they get these from, I've actually installed one of their tunnels on somebody else's channel. I won't say whose it is, but I've put up one of these tunnels on their channel. They're fantastic quality. So Oakland's got all different sizes of those as well. So if you're looking for a tunnel or anything like that, get across there as well. Anyway, guys, I hope that you've got loads planned for this week. I certainly have. Like I said, I'm going to get the panels sorted now over the next few days, hopefully, and then I've got 12 days. I can get to the plot, get on top of things, and get some filming done, and that's what's exciting me at the moment. Anyway, I hope you have a great day. I'll see you in the next one. Bye all.